Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. In this video, we'll be going over a bunch of my favorite setups for damage dealers in Update 46. I've been testing like crazy live over on Twitch during my subathon, which is still going on as of posting this video. Now, this won't be a full build guide for each of these setups, but hopefully will give you some ideas you can use for your subclassing DPS builds. So all that we'll talk about here and a bunch more is on my website at skinnycheeks.gg. Several full guides on there, as well as this page full of combat metric supports from a ton of setups that I tested, and just a bunch of configurations here for both 2-bar and 1-bar builds. And one quick thing before we start, most of these setups are done with single target DPS in mind for the dummy. Some were already done in Tideborn, but for the ones that are in Highland, you can just make that swap for content where you can't stand in one place. And Null Arca can be swapped for something like Onsul or Coral Riptide for fights that are not single target focused. You can also swap in the Velothi Mythic and a 1-piece crit chance instead of a monster set for slightly lower single target but better AoE damage. And this will be true of most of these setups as long as they don't use the Overload ultimate, and that's because Velothi reduces Overload's damage too. And there's plenty of other gear sets that are good. I have a tier list up on my website as well if you want to check that out. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. First up, we're going to go through the Killer Tentacles setups. These are listed under the Combat Metrics report page on the website and are focused around Herald of the Tome and Assassination. These builds are not using the Fatecarver beam and are using the Tentacular Dreadmorph instead of Cephaliarch's Flail. And all of these in this section use Arcanist as the base class. This first setup here, I got 170k DPS and it uses Stormcalling as the third line. And on all of these, you can see the race and base class at the top left and any scribing scripts at the top right. So just a few notes about this setup. You will open up with the Power Overload ultimate and then use Incapacitating Strike from then on. I did mess this one up and I started Killer's Blade instead of Surprise Attack around 20% health left. That should be about 25 to 28%-ish that you swap those. Tentacular Dread is also used at 3 stacks, ideally during off-balance periods. Then for this next setup here, we're going to be using Aedric Spear in place of Stormcalling. Very solid setup at 166k DPS and a lot more AoE damage since Biting Jabs is an AoE spammable. Same rotation principles, we're just opening with Languid Eye instead of Overload. And then we have another similar setup except with Winter's Embrace as the third line. Sustain was a bit more difficult, so I had to swap to the Recuperative morph of Tomebearer. I did use Highland here, but for most of the setups you can either go with Highland or Tideborn. Tideborn is more relaxed to use in many scenarios, while Highland is much more niche. For the Ardent Flame version, shout out and thanks to Charles for letting me share his parse. I'll have his video linked down below showing the setup in action, so make sure to check that out. He got 178k DPS with this version. Instead of using the banner, he dropped that for a couple of additional skills. So Molten Whip is slotted on the back bar for the passive weapon and spell damage, and also leaves room for Barbed Trap on the front bar for the extra weapon and spell damage from the Fighters Guild passives. Then for the main spammable, he's using Escalating Rune Blades, as this will build the crux for Tentacular Dread since there's no banner slotted. Really great results here, and what Charles has said is the top setup for DPS and content for Update 46. And here's a screenshot from Zorax getting over 200k single target damage on Boss A hard mode with this. Just crazy damage on this one. All right, next up are two builds that are pretty similar, Radiant Flame and Burning Light. These both use Templar as the base class, but that doesn't really matter much. You could use one of the others and get about the same results. Starting with Radiant Flame, we're using Dawn's Wrath, Ardent Flame, and Assassination. This was a pretty fun 162k DPS setup using Whip as the main spammable, and then swap into Jesus Beam around 30% health left for Execute. If you want to use the Radiant Glory morph instead, it's still a great option, just start Execute a couple percent later. For my ultimates, I cast Standard of Might into an Incap and then repeated and did that again. It seemed about the same damage as opening up with a standard and then doing Incaps for the rest of the fight. I also tested this in Tideborn instead of Highland and got great results still at 158k DPS. The next setup swaps out Dawn's Wrath for Aedric Spear, and we use Biting Jabs as the spammable instead of Whip. So we get a bit more AoE here than in the previous setup. Then Whip is moved to the back bar, so we still get the passive weapon and spell damage. I also used Tideborn here instead of Highland, so with Highland this could be a few K higher probably. And I also did a separate version here with Dual Wield on the back bar. Still very good results, and a bit tankier with the Black Rose Dual Wield bonus active. This one is on the website under the Burning Light page, and then the Radiant Flame setup is under the Combat Metrics reports page. All right, moving on to the next setup. This is a really fun one. I'm calling it Aedric Corruption. I have both 1-bar and 2-bar versions of it. This one also has a full build page on the website. Using the Necromancer base class, but you could use Templar or Nightblade for similar results. The setup uses Gravelord, Aedric Spear, and Assassination. I think Blastbones and Jabs together is a very satisfying combo, and the skill setup is pretty easy as you only have 3 active abilities on the front bar and then 3 on the back bar at any given time. You'll swap Jabs to Killer's Blade, about 25% health left, and I was dropping Blastbones out of the rotation somewhere about 15% health left. I really like the overall ease of use and good stats on this setup though, really good penetration and crit damage. For this test I used Narayaneth, but you could also use Velothi and a 1-piece crit for some more AoE damage and a little lower single target. I would recommend using the Unnerving morph of Boneyard so that you get the major breach for most content. Ice Comet's just kind of a filler ult here that I'm opening up with. Shooting Star is probably better for most scenarios. You can also use the Glacial Colossus skill in the Gravelord line for the major vulnerability debuff, but that already is present on the dummy, so it doesn't make much sense to use it there. Staff on the back bar is also good with Elemental Blockade instead of Stampede, would give good AoE results. You can really do that with most of these setups. Then here's a version with dual wield on the back bar. Could do the same swap to Velothi with this one too. The premise is pretty applicable for most setups. Then I also went back later and tested a 1-bar version of this that I really liked well. This one is under the CMX reports page on the website if you want to reference it there. Pretty similar setup, except we are dropping the banner and now have room for Merciless Resolve on the front bar. Pretty fun build I thought. Has good single target and AoE damage and can swap to Magicka Jabs and Impale if you want to play it as a mag setup. Alright, moving on. This next setup I'm calling Frozen Decay, also Necromancer base, and this one is important as we are using Corpse Burster, which is only available to Necromancers. This setup uses Gravelord, Winter's Embrace, and Assassination. So the first setup here, we're using Whirl of the Depths and Corpse Burster together with Velothi and a 1-piece crit. The idea is to spam Detonating Siphon as long as there's a corpse and hit Merciless Resolve when there isn't. I actually would prefer to move Merciless to the back bar and change it to the Relentless Focus morph and then slot Venom Skull here, but trying to test it was being really buggy for me. Blastbones kept not casting for some reason due to the corpses made by Venom Skull. Something going on with their new corpse limit that they need to get figured out. So I couldn't really get through a test properly with that setup, but it should be very good if you want to do that. Also, Unnerving Boneyard is usually the preferred morph over Avid for the major breach. You can also move Arctic Blast to the front bar to spam whenever there's no corpse up. It's a really nice AoE setup. So I just thought this one was really fun. Single target is a little lower, but really good AoE damage and a nice thematic build. Alright, next up we'll go through some Fatecarver beam setups, both for 1 and 2-bar builds. I already put out a full guide for the Beam Machine build that uses Herald of the Tome, Assassination, and Dawn's Wrath, so make sure to check that one out. But essentially you can just drop Dawn's Wrath for quite a few other skill lines and get great results. So I'll cover a few of those now. With all of these tests, I used the Pragmatic morph of Fatecarver. This one is a little lower damage, but it's easier to sustain and gives a huge shield. I'll also show a few parses from King 8 as well that used the Exhausting morph, and he got over 170k DPS on each of these. Starting out with Aedric Tome, this one uses the Aedric Spear line. I do have a full build page for this one on the website as well. I got 162k DPS with this setup here. For the Killer's Blade slot, you can drop that for an Aedric Spear ability if you need the extra crit damage, but I was already at the cap on the dummy. Most of these setups will also use Highland Sentinel, Null Arca, 1-piece crit, and Velothi with the Maelstrom 2-hander on the back bar, so you can swap Highland to Deadly Strike or Tideborn though and still get great results. I also had another setup for this that I really liked, using Black Rose Dual Wield on the front bar and the Narayaneth monster set. Really good results without Highland at 161k DPS. This setup wasn't tested on all of the versions, but as long as you have Quick Cloak to proc the Black Rose Prison Dual Wield, it will work on all the beam setups we'll go over. I think it's a pretty fun build, and it's a little tankier with the extra damage mitigation from the Black Rose Prison Dual Wield. Then if you like the 1.5 bar setups, you can do that too. Still works great. A bit more front bar flexibility with Quick Cloak being moved to the back bar. Again, this full build is on the website if you want to check it out for some various gear and skill bar options that work for different scenarios. King 8 did a version of this with the Exhausting morph that got 175k DPS. Really strong setup here. So thanks to him for letting me share this. I do have a video of it linked down below in the description. Next we have Herald of the Flame. This also has a build page on the website. Pretty much the same here, except we have Flames of Oblivion and Venomous Claw slotted along with the Standard of Might ultimate. Really strong ultimate makes this setup one of my favorites. Flames of Oblivion also gives you Major Savagery and Prophecy, freeing up your banner to use something else. Then here is an almost 1.5 bar build build, Venomous Claw is 24 seconds instead of 30 like the other back bar dots, but if you wanted to make it a full 1.5 bar setup, you could just cast it every 30 seconds along with those other skills. King 8 did another similar setup here, got 171k DPS using the Exhausting morph. I also have his video of this one linked down below. Next up, this one is called Tome of Decay on my website and uses Gravelord as the final line. This one doesn't show up as well on the dummy because crit chance is so high with Highland Sentinel, and that massive penetration bonus that Gravelord gets is wasted, but it can be really good in content due to those things. And having a Colossus ultimate can potentially be good for the group as well. I changed to swords here because I was going over 100% crit chance, but swap to daggers if you aren't using Highland Sentinel. Then here is a dual wield back bar setup getting pretty similar results at 156k DPS. Not quite a 1.5 bar setup due to Skeletal Archer being every 20 seconds, but if you did want to make it even easier, you could move the Archer to the front bar for a legit 1.5 bar build, and it still got some pretty good results as well at 148k DPS. Moving on, the following setups don't have full build pages, but they are listed on the combat metrics page. Winter's Fate is the Winter's Embrace version. Great results here at 159k DPS. Mostly the same premise, except we're using a Frost enchant on the back bar to proc more chilled. And then here's a version at 150k DPS for the easier 1.5 bar setup. A bit tankier with this one as you get 2 Winter's Embrace abilities front barred for the extra armor, and then Black Rose Prison dual wield for the extra 6% mitigation. Fate's Guardian is the Animal Companions version. This one got 157k DPS. I used Sub Assault and Bull Netch here, but you could use Deep Fissure as well. Killer's Blade is flexible for Quick Cloak, Barbed Trap, or whatever you'd want to run instead. Then I got 151k DPS for the 1.5 bar build version of it. Then Herald of the Storm is the Storm Calling version. This got 155k DPS. Hurricane is kind of nice though because you get your major resistance buffs if you don't have someone in group running Frost Cloak to provide those for you. Then here's the 1.5 bar version at 151k DPS. If you want to push that a little higher, I did squeak out a tiny bit more running Liquid Lightning and then Hurricane on the back bar. It's not quite a 1.5 bar build, but definitely an option as well. Then here's the Daedric Summoning version. Not really any room for both pets without dropping the banner, but only 1 back bar skill cast with Stampede, so almost a 1 bar build here actually. Pretty simple setup overall. And then the same goes for the dual wield version, almost a 1 bar build, just 1 skill on the back bar every 30 seconds. Then for the 1 bar beam build, this setup with Aedric Spear does have its own build page on the website. First up, we have the Velothi setup. This got 131k. It uses Narayanth, Null Arca, Velothi, and Black Rose Prison dual wield. I used the 2-piece Highland Sentinel for the crit chance for the dummy, but you could swap that to a 1-piece Trainee and 1-piece Druid's Braid for the extra health. For non-single target setups, you can swap Null Arca to Onsul. You do have Relentless Focus on the back bar for the buff, but you don't actually use your back bar. Then here's an alternate Velothi setup that got 129k. This uses Tideborn and Null Arca together. Again, you could swap Null Arca for Onsul for AoE fights. For the Oakensoul setup, the DPS is a little lower, but you do have more defensive buffs, so I could see some people preferring this version, even with a little bit of a hit to DPS. So we have Narayanth, Null Arca, and a 4-piece Highland Sentinel. Then you can swap Null Arca for Tideborn, Order's Wrath, or Deadly Strike for more AoE. Then almost identical results with Tideborn and Null Arca in a 1-piece crit. And again, Null Arca can be swapped out for a more AoE friendly set like Order's Wrath or Deadly Strike. Well, that was a lot of setups we just went through, but I do have some more that I didn't go over posted on the website, so make sure to check that out to get some ideas for your builds. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps out a lot. And let me know if you have any questions, either here in the comments, in the Discord server, or stop by my streams on Twitch and ask me live. Big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Really appreciate the support, and a special thanks to these folks here. I couldn't keep doing this without you. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.